Hello, everybody. Welcome or welcome back to Tiny Tiger Collective. I'm Helena, and this is my corner of YouTube where I share my love of stationery, planners, journals, and today I'm bringing you a video that has probably been the top requested video since I started my channel on New Year's Eve last year. And that is to walk you through my handwriting and how I learned to write like this. In every video where I've showcased my journals, I've received the loveliest comments from all of you about how beautiful my handwriting looks. I confess, I've been known for my beautiful handwriting for a very long time. Even in primary school, when I was 11, 12 years old, every time we had a substitute teacher come into our class and review our exercise books where we would write small essays or journal entries about what we did on the weekends, the first thing that they would comment, sometimes exclaiming out loud, would be, "Oh my God, Helena, your handwriting is so beautiful." Eventually, when I went through high school and university, it became something of a bit of a reputation. I still recall in second year economics lecture, we were in one of those old school lecture theatres where every row of tables were stacked up behind one another along an incline so everyone could look down on the tables in front of them and the lecturer standing down below on the stage. I was making notes in the middle of the lecture when a young man sitting 2 rows behind me looked down at my handwriting. And at that time, Lord of the Rings was the top film in the cinemas. And he cried out loud in front of 500 people in the lecture theatre, "Oh my God, she's writing in Elvish." And even the lecturer stopped and everyone turned to look at what he was exclaiming about. I also admit that my handwriting has caused me some embarrassment sometimes too. It's not beyond me to realize that my handwriting is incredibly difficult for most people to read. And I've had many self conscious moments at birthday parties growing up where once the birthday person got to my birthday card and tried to read it aloud for everyone at the party, they struggled to make sense of every second word. And it was in those moments where my face would flush and I would wish from the bottom of my soul that I had a simple, neat print handwriting that meant that I didn't have to have all of this attention at somebody else's birthday party. My best friend in high school, though, perhaps she was just trying to comfort me. She did tell me that she found that the better she got to know me, the easier my handwriting was to read. So she would argue that my handwriting was some sort of code, and the prize of a deep, meaningful friendship with me was that you got to crack the code and my handwriting became legible. So, one thing I'll make explicit now is that I've never formally trained to write the way that I write. I've never taken a calligraphy class, as interested as I am in calligraphy. And from the little that I do know about calligraphy, I know that my handwriting doesn't follow a lot of best practice guidelines. So please don't take this as an authoritative guide on how to write well or how to write correctly. But I hope that given so many of you have expressed interest in this topic, that you might still take something of value out of me showing you simply my methods, my practices, and my quirks in how I write. And I also want to open up a wider conversation about what our handwriting say about us and what it does not. So let's begin with a practical side. I always try to set up my writing desk, my writing station, in a way that is as ergonomic, comfortable as possible. So I try to get a nice height, and that means that while working at a computer, it is recommended that your elbow be in line with the table. I find that when I'm writing, I really like to get a little bit lower and a little bit closer to the page. In fact, when I film myself writing, I'm not actually filming myself in the most comfortable position for me because I have to try to keep the book in frame and I try to keep my head out of the camera's lens. But when I'm really comfortable writing, I actually like to tilt my book at a 45-degree angle, and I do get quite close to the paper. So sometimes I'm conscious that when I write on camera, I'm actually writing in a position that's not particularly sustainable. So I'll film a little bit of my writing, and then I usually take the camera, switch the camera off when I think I've got enough B-roll, and I'll just write in a more comfortable position. The next consideration is starting with the right tools. As a fountain pen lover, I have taken many years to figure out which pens feel the most comfortable and natural in my hands, and by extension, result in what I believe is the most beautiful expression of my writing. So for me, I have 3 different instruments in my collection that I think achieves that result. My favorite all-time grail pen is my Pilot Custom 823 that I purchased in Japan in the amber colorway. There is something about this beautiful large nib and the needle point of this fine size that makes my writing feel particularly precise. I feel like I always have meticulous control of this pen, and the weight, the grip, the girth of this pen is one that, for my hands, produces the most comfortable writing experience, even for long journaling sessions. The other pen that I use every day is my Sailor Pro Gear Slims. If I'm honest, I do think the Pro Gear Slims are just a little bit too slim for me. I've never used a Pro Gear before, but I can imagine that would probably be my sweet spot. But in the absence of Pro Gears, I actually own 3 Pro Gear Slims that I use every day. This one is from the Sound of Rain series in the winter or tall colorway. Sailor fountain pens are well known for having nibs with a feedback that feels like writing with a mechanical pencil. So that feedback, that toothiness in my writing gives me that sense of control, that sense of precision that enables my handwriting to come out at its very best. And I don't currently have this pen inked at this moment, so I won't be able to demonstrate it for you. But the third pen that I find always makes my handwriting look good is my Lamy 2000. This hooded nib also has the most unique shape that I think is also slightly like an architect nib. The variations between the down and the cross strokes makes my handwriting look especially fascinating and multidimensional. The fountain pens that I find more difficult to control are those that are either too thin in my hands, so thinner than the Progia Slim, or those that feel too thick. I also struggle when the nib is too smooth, and especially when I'm writing on a smooth coated paper like my Tomoe River paper Hobonichi planners. It can feel too much like I'm using a whiteboard marker on a whiteboard, and it's difficult for me to get consistency in my lines where I might be trying to make a loop and it just goes all over the place and over an entire page. It might not be very noticeable to anyone else reading my writing, but I can feel the differences. I can see those tiny inconsistencies in the ways that certain loops and curves are formed. So, paper matters as well. If I am using a fountain pen, a gel pen, or a ballpoint pen, where it does feel a little bit too smooth on a paper like Tomoe River, swapping to another paper with a little bit more toothiness, such as my Midori, traveler's notebooks, or even printer copy paper, can really make the difference in terms of creating more control over my pen. Over the years, I've also found that small grids, like the 3.7 or the 3.8 centimeter grids in my Hobonichi planners, result in the best handwriting. There is something about the vertical lines of a grid that I find also very gently guides my handwriting towards a consistent angle. When I'm writing purely on lined paper, especially if the lines are quite far apart, then I might look back and depending on how I tilted the book while I was writing, I find that the angle of my handwriting goes all over the place. So, grid or dotted can be really helpful in keeping my lines and my angles consistent. As a right-handed person, I find that when my handwriting starts going off the edge of the paper, that's when it starts getting really wobbly as well, because I don't have something to support my hand as I fill up the edge. Similarly, when I get to the bottom of any pages, I run into the exact same problem. So what I do is I will use either a pencil board, but it has to be something thicker and sturdier than the Hobonichi pencil boards. I find that this is just a little bit too thin and flexible to provide meaningful support. My favorite is the Traveler's Notebook pencil boards, which are significantly thicker and sturdier. But before I started filming this morning, for the life of me, I can't find where my pencil board has gone. I know it's around here somewhere, I'm not worried, but it's been tucked into a notebook or tucked into a pencil case and it's nowhere to be found. But you don't have to rush out and buy a pencil board. You can use something like a thick postcard, and having this to help me support my hand as I write off to the right hand or the bottom edges can make all the difference in making sure my handwriting is neat across an entire page. This is a lovely one that Alison from Little Coco Studio included for me in her last happy mail. So let me take my favorite pen and get down to my writing. So even when I'm not writing to the edge, I love having some kind of card or pencil board to support my hands on the page. This can serve as a reminder for me to not accidentally smear the ink as it's drying. But it's also, when you come to books, right, even for something with a stitching like the Hobonichis, where it lies flat on any page, there's still a little hump. And when the paper rises to meet my pen, that can sometimes result in a few bumps and errors that I didn't intend to write. When I'm developing my writing, I do find that slowing down, really getting used to the feeling of the pen in your hand, and making those micro adjustments to gain the muscle memory of wielding the pen will naturally see an improvement in your handwriting over time. When I was refining my handwriting through my teens, one of the things that I would do is to make gradual, incremental changes. So, for example, I might notice that I don't like my D's. So, I might look at other people's handwritings. I might look at fonts that I really love. And I look across a range of different capital D's until I develop the one that I think not only looks the most beautiful to me, but feels the most natural to who I am and how I write. There are a few things about my handwriting that make it quite unique. Where I believe traditional calligraphy really emphasizes balance between the head, the body, and the tail, I have quite outsized heads and tails, as you can see with my D's. I also tend to write these enormous tails that are twice as long as the body of my writing, if not three times. I also write these very quickly, and you can see that sometimes it means that my handwriting skips. So much so that when I'm journaling on these grids, when I'm on the next line, the tail can look like opening parentheses. And that is something about my handwriting that increases the difficulty and the illegibility. But it's something that is so me and is so difficult for me to change after 39 years writing like this. Okay, I haven't been writing for 39 years because I didn't write straight out of the womb, but we'll say 35 years of writing like this. You might also notice on this top line that I do something very interesting with my T's. So when I write a word like interesting and there are two T's in that word, I draw a really big dramatic line that connects the two T's. And then I put in the dots on my eyes. Sometimes I'll do it even if there's one T in the word, like handwriting. And then you'll see that in some words like thank you, I don't bother to do the swoop. It is so natural, organic, and unconscious for me. There's really no rhyme or reason why sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't. But there's no doubt that when I do it, it results in some of the most dramatic and interesting writing. So have a think about elements of your writing that you'd like to change. If it's perhaps changing a different letter, changing the way you draw tails, or experimenting with new ways to cross your T's and dot your I's. What I've done in the past is to focus on one change at a time and then consciously, as much as I can, working on integrating that new writing style into my handwriting over the coming weeks. And indeed, it would mean that perhaps in the first few days, I am constantly reverting back to the old way of writing. And those pages will look a little bit messy because maybe I'm consciously writing out in the new way. And then the next time I write a capital D, it goes back to the old way. And as I'm developing the new style, sometimes it would look beautiful, sometimes it would look like a complete mess. But slowly, bit by bit, even keeping a little notebook or a post-it note in front of your laptop while you're working, and as you're waiting for something to load, as you're waiting on an email, you've got a couple minutes or even a few seconds, is to practice writing your new words. And gradually, it will become muscle memory. And in fact, it will be more effortful for you to write in the old way than it is for you to write in the new way. And once it becomes second nature, you can look at something else about your handwriting. Well, now that I've developed my capital D's, now I'm going to focus on my lowercase r's, or now I'm going to focus on my I's, my T's. Now, I'd like to take a step back from handwriting to reflect on what handwriting means in the wider context of identity work within a socio historical, cultural, political context. As a sociologist, I'm really drawn to the ways in which handwriting functions as one artifact, one expression of a gendered, racialized, and classed identity. Historically, in Australia and many other parts of the Western world, we're taught growing up that neat or classical traditional penmanship, like the one that my handwriting resembles, was a marker of morality and virtue. The handwriting like this signaled somebody who was diligent, thoughtful, intelligent, not to mention the way that my old world style coheres with very traditional patriarchal notions of femininity. One of my viewers and a fellow YouTube stationary content creator, Linda, has talked about how when she has a first initial thought about something, she always tries to dig a little bit deeper and ask herself where that feeling comes from, whether positive or negative. So in my case, looking at my handwriting and thinking that it's beautiful, which is incredibly kind of all of you, by the way, nevertheless, for me, reflects many of the ideas that we've grown up with around how this kind of handwriting, which is not out of place in a 19th century love letter, or the kind of note that a domestic goddess is expected to write and tuck into her children's lunchboxes, or as she meticulously draws out the guest list for the dinner party that she's throwing for her husband and his boss, is that it really draws on very conservative ideals around the restraint, grace, and the traditional femininity that girls and women are expected to embody. So, as beautiful as my handwriting may seem, I also want to challenge the idea that that somehow makes me a better writer, a better journaler, or somehow more deserving of beautiful fountain pens, papers, and stationery than anybody else. I hope that I can learn to appreciate my handwriting as beautiful, even when I'm mortified by a person struggling to read my birthday cards, because it's me. I hope that my friends and my loved ones can recognize my handwriting from a mile away. And when they see it at the front of a letter in their mailbox, that they know that it's going to be filled with affection. And that is assuming my letter even makes it to their mailbox, because when I had to write down by hand all of our wedding guests, several of our wedding invitations were not delivered. And one where the concierge of my friend's apartment almost turned it away because they couldn't read my handwriting. For me, I love my friends' handwritings, irrespective of their protestations of their ugliness or messiness. This postcard that I've been using to support my hand came from Alison of Little Coco Studio, and I adore her handwriting. Every time I see it, it just fills my heart with so much happiness because I know it's always about her passion, her enthusiasm for stationery and art. Okay, another example to share with you, but I'm covering up her name and phone number, was that this little note card was slipped into my son's cubby at his daycare a few weeks ago. And it was a lovely fellow parent who wanted to invite my son to her son's birthday party. And I am never throwing this piece of paper away as crinkled as it became coming home in my son's backpack. But that expression of community building and generosity is one that I never want to forget. Here is another example of a note that was slipped into our hotel room on the last leg of our travels in LA. And it was a lovely couple that we had met at the hotel earlier that morning. And they slipped this into our room along with a bag of delicious snacks and treats that they had purchased from the local deli. Traditionally, some people may not think this looks like a neat cursive script, but to me, this is such a beautiful piece of writing because it came from a beautiful human being who had extended us so much kindness when we had just met earlier that day and wanted to share a token of their appreciation and love through little gifts. What I've come to believe over the years is that handwriting can be a beautiful expression of our inner worlds, of our affection and love for strangers, for friends, for loved ones. But it shouldn't be a space for blame or judgment. Whether you think your script is exquisitely beautiful or whether you think that it is loopy, messy, scribbly, at the end of the day, it's yours. And the people who love you, when they see your handwriting, their heart will soar. And I think that's the beauty of handwriting. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I would love to hear in the comments, what do you think about your handwriting? Is it something that has come to define you and your identity over time? Is it distinctive? Have people recognized your handwriting from a long way away, saw a little scribbled post-it note and immediately knew it was you? Are you someone who has been self-conscious of your handwriting at all, whether it is because you've judged it as being messy or not particularly pretty, or perhaps, like me, you've been all too embarrassed about the ways in which it's not legible? I'd love to hear your experiences and your reflections in the comments below. Thank you so much for spending this morning with me. Next week, I hope to bring you another Inky Play video in which I'll finally open up the sample inks that Alison shared with me, and I will swatch them in my new cards and my books, and we'll talk through these beautiful collection of colors that I will get to grace my pages in the weeks to come. Hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.